A very, very good evening, really. I have Dr. A.J. Thomas, who was talking to me this morning, and he had sent me a huge presentation he had made for the Adda today. And we had to cut it down. And I thought that he has been so kind to cut down half of it to be able to present in time today, that if I take too long, it will be like disturbing the time him, So what I thought was that I should also write down what I have to say so that I'm limited to the few minutes I should take. The first thing is, of course, let me request our president, Dr. Uma Dasgupta, to greet you on our behalf. As most of you know, Uma does not need any introduction because of the love with which she researches Tagore and has researched all her life, intimately associated with Shantiniketan. And her most recent book on the history of Sriniketan, already creating ripples inside all of us, inside every Tagore lover. Uma, do welcome our guests, please.
Yes, indeed. I welcome everyone very, very warmly. And this is such a welcome thing, the Poetry Adda, once a month, that I honestly feel very reluctant to take any time for a little speech by me, because we are all waiting to hear the poets. So indeed, welcome, very welcome. And I would like the Adda to get started, Vasan, if you will, please.
Thank you so much, Uma. And as you see, even now, we have our vice president also here. And of course, she's our beloved professor of English and such a lady of literature. She is here, and she had an audio problem. So may I take her permission to begin? Because, we have such a huge evening in front of us. Krishna?
Yes, Vasant, do please begin.
Thanks to the dedication of our lovely team of poetry coordinators, this exceptional evening is ahead, and none of us want to keep you away from it. But it would be insensitive of me not to share how this great poet from the South, Balamani Amma, came our way today. Although this poet had been lying in our selection for a number of years, especially undiscovered, because we could neither find her English translations, nor could we find anyone who loved Malayalam poetry enough to be able to help us. And then suddenly, our English coordinator, Anjana Boshu, introduced this lovely poet from Thrissur, C.P. Surendran, early this year. And a month or two later, even a great poet from the South again, Satchidanandan. And then suddenly this gateway to the South we find opening. And today we cannot thank, actually I cannot, all of us cannot thank C.P. Surendran enough for introducing this lovely gentleman, Dr. A.J. Thomas. He will, of course, take this evening ahead, and we would get to know Balamani Amma, who we feel is like Tagore is to us. Maybe, for the South, I would not be wrong in saying that Balamani is Tagore of the South. We also have with us the family of Balamani Amma. And I do welcome them with as much warmth as possible. And I can't thank especially, because the first person we got to know through A.J. Thomas was Suvarna. Yeah, and she is the daughter of Balamani Amma's younger sister. And we happened to go through logs, through blogs which she has, and we came to know so much about Balamani Amma, although there was no really poetry existing anywhere. Suvarna is a pathologist and professor who has translated Balamani completely, and yet she and I and we, all of us were sort of sad that her translations are not traceable. And she, of course, introduced us to Sulochana, and who now we can fondly call Sulu, because she said, I give you the permission to call me what my family would. And so did Madhav, Monu. He's not yet here, but I must share with you, he called me this morning at 6 o'clock saying that why can't I get in? So I reminded him that this meeting was for the evening and not the morning. And then he said, oh my God, I committed this mistake. So I'm sure he's trying to find his way in. And because we have no time, I would like to welcome all three of them. And Sulochana, of course, sent me this lovely book of hers. And I must acknowledge with a great deal of thanks that this book opened up vistas for us. And I'm going to share this with all of us in Srijan whenever the time is ripe. But to introduce her, she is the author, translator of this monograph, of course, and a degree from Calicut Medical College in '63. And she married someone who was working for James Finlay and Company, and she herself has been working in the tea estates, in their tea estates for a number of years. That Finlay Company became ultimately Tata Finlay, and where she retired as the manager of the community development. And of course, she is extremely fond of her mother, and she respects her no end. And as we saw in this book, I just unfortunately received it only yesterday afternoon, but yet I have spent the entire night going through this, and I thank Sulu very, very much for doing this to us. I will of course share the 6,000 words which Thomas has sent me, and I got a printout of this, Thomas, and every word in this is like a pearl. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable how beautifully he has introduced everything we would like to know about Balamani Amma. But I believe he is trying to cut it down as much as he can, so that we can get to hear as much as possible from the lovely family which we have with us. But may I present A.J. Thomas again. Again, this chapbook has been sent to all of you. And in the chapbook, of course, it will help Raju also, because every description of each one who is participating today is there, so that the time is saved in introducing fully. Born in a village in Kerala, taking his MPhil and PhD in English and from MG University, Kottayam, an English poet, translator, literature with more than 20 titles, editing Indian Literature Sahitya Academies bi-monthly for 23 years, teaching English in Libya, senior consultant in IGNOU in Delhi, winning awards like Katha, the AKMG Prize, Vodafone Crossword, etc., etc. His contribution as a poet include Germination, Agamani Pal Ka Nirman, his poetry in Hindi translation, and translations of poetry, fiction, drama of various people like Paul Zakaria, etc. And invited as guest speaker to international conferences, reading his poetry at many important meets all around the world, in Australia, South Korea, Hong Kong, Thailand, Nepal, in India too, everywhere. And today, again, thanks to CP with us today. Present Thomas, please take the evening with you, and we will mute ourselves now. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My warmest greetings to you all. I would like to begin by thanking Srijan for inviting me to deliver this address celebrating the life and works of one of Malayalam's greatest poets, Nalapat Balamani Amma. Especially Basan for his loving research and for relentlessly mining out all that he could lay hands on about the poet. Born this month 113 years ago, Balamani Amma had an abiding connection with Kolkata, the city where her husband V.M. Nair was born and brought up, and where he worked and eventually headed the Woolford Transport Company, selling Bentleys and Rolls Royces. Also, where she and her 4 children lived for long years, with her eldest daughter Kamala, who later became Kamala Das, the renowned poet and fiction writer studying in Kolkata till school final. Kamala has written famously about her childhood and adolescence in Kolkata in her moving memoirs in Malayalam. Balamani Amma went on to become one of the most important Indian poets, honored not just with the Padma Bhushan, but also the very best of literary awards like Saraswati Samman, the Sahitya Academy Award, the Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Kerala government named Eluthachan Puraskaram. As for her poetry, as had been in other languages, in Malayalam too, in a world dominated by males, female poets were not easily recognized by critics. And her male contemporaries like Edasheri Govindan Nair, P. Kunyiraman Nair, and Vailopillil Sridhar Menon, who made up the Kavitrayam, or the poetic trinity in Malayalam, had loomed large. And though she had been one of the most profound, mystical, philosophical, and humane poetic voices in Malayalam, it was only towards the end of the 20th century, when literary canons were under heavy review in the aftermodern period, that poets like Balamani Amma and Sugata Kumari became recognized as outstanding poets too, blazing their own trails. And Balamani Amma was no longer being merely the woman poet who had been known as grandmother and mother of Malayalam poetry, after critics like Ayyappa Panikar rectifying the lacuna. In fact, out of the more than 500 poems written by her, only some 80 had dealt with wifehood, motherhood, and domesticity. K. Sachidanandan, renowned poet and critic, had quoted in his introduction to Ayyappa Panikar selected essays how Panikar had assessed Balamani Amma, I quote, as a philosophical poet, not just as a poet of motherhood, as critics are wont to qualify her. A poet who painfully conscious of the violence of the modern world and tries to battle it through her monologues and lyrics. Also, Srijan, in their invitation, has described Balamani Amma as the Tagore of the South. So did Basant a little while ago. Indeed, with her serious engagement with the themes of nationalism, deep humanism, mysticism, philosophy, mythology, and metaphysics in her poetry and her highest level of attainment, Balamani Amma richly deserves that epithet. Also, the fact that, like Tagore, she had no formal education at all. She had been so fascinated by Tagore's English writings that as early as at the age of 8, she had requested her uncle, who was her guru, the acclaimed Malayalam poet and translator, Sanskrit scholar, and philosopher Nalapat Menon, who had a world-class library which he had made available to his nieces, Balamani and Ammini, to arrange to teach her English so that she could read Tagore. Gurudev had such a deep influence on her at that tender age when she had just begun to feel poetic stirrings. It is interesting to note that she lived in Kolkata for 17 years during Tagore's lifetime and that she was his junior contemporary. an intense half century of her poetry. While preparing this paper, I got to translate two of her fairly long poems written half a century apart. Calcuttaile Iruttara, or The Dark Dungeon of Calcutta, written in 1929, and Vrutha Kanyaga, or The Aged Virgin, in 1979. The first, written when she was 20, brims with her concern for the poor and the oppressed, the hungry and disease-ridden labor class who are also prone to vices that undo them. She indignantly chastises the affluent for showing scant concern for the laborers who, after all, create their wealth. She writes, "Oh, the affluent who shut your eyes seeing the ocean of labor fill with waves of tears, this horrendous darkness of stupendous poverty, the shadow of your mountainous wealth." And she goes on exhorting the rich to pay heed to the Mahatma and do away with the differences in class and to strive together in unity for the advancement of the nation. One cannot miss in this poem the degree of her social commitment and concern for the poor and the marginalized, even at the age of 20. Then, when he wrote The Aged Virgin at the age of 70, after a life full of experiences in celebrating the beatitudes of motherhood, sisterhood, daughterhood, and sublime domestic and conjugal happiness, how he asserts womanhood to its fullest by talking of a woman ascetic leading a lonely, barren life in a forest hermitage, while surrounded by creatures who are invariably in pairs, enjoying conjugality. That maiden then seeks out the company of a young ascetic to experience that conjugality at least once in her life so that she could work her way out towards liberation. And I quote, as I submitted my life then to a spasm akin to the ones experienced at the time of death, I became aware of the immortal sensations of the grand principle of joining atom on atom. I need not search anymore. I have paid my debt to the world. My Mukti Marga beckons me back. This I translated. Within that half century, she had written hundreds of other poems, not just about motherhood and family, but about society, the world, nationalist aspirations, the country's independence. Also, her most noted poems, the spiritual, mystical, philosophic ones, the famous monologues. In fact, her literary career had spanned more than 7 decades. Let me now deal with her main themes. Her early promise. In 1927, when she was 18, even before she had written The Dark Dungeon, she wrote widely noticed poems like Vittaikuga, or Let Me Go, that opens with the lines, "Let me go out of this cage, let me fly about in the sky a while," a poem about how the heart of an 18-year-old woman had throbbed, yearning to break free and experience the wide world. Like that little caged bird, annoyed at being caressed by its human keepers, remembering the jungle it was born in, its lotus ponds, grassy patches, rows of blossoms there, and the glorious expanse of the blue sky that awaited beyond. Also, the poem Dukhat in the Nidalil, or In the Shadow of Grief, addressed to God, asking him, "Why is this mist of grief rising within my heart, even when the tender rays of the morning sun make the golden chain that links her to him?" In both the poems, we see a young, accomplished poet, her faculty fully blossomed. Between her feelings for the others and the world at large, and her inner world of philosophy and mysticism, she has dealt with a variety of themes in which children are depicted as symbolizing Chit Shakti, or the mind's power. In a famous poem she wrote at the age of 20, titled Mathu Chumbanam, or Mother's Kiss, she attributes to an infant the noblest of things suspected of an ideal humanity. When empowered by the mother's loving kiss, the child's hand is expected to wipe away the tears of suffering humanity, to support the struggling nation, to defeat the rising injustice. In fact, Sopanam, first of her four collected works that had several of the poems covering various aspects of an infant-mother relationship, deserved the serious critical acclaim it received way back in 1958 when it was published. Only that the later critics had not updated themselves about the other great poems she had written as she progressed, and some of them got stuck with the grandmother figure. The mother figure of Balamani Amma's poetry becomes different in that her love is never sullied by vested interest or selfishness, and beyond that, it converts itself into the love for other beings. It not only embraces the sorrows of others, but also owns them. Motherhood also is included in all that she experienced in this world, which she turned into a channel in her quest for the Supreme Being. Through motherhood, she was in a quest into herself. About 40 of her poems are on motherhood and motherliness. For Balamani Amma, family meant the joint family, with all the members of the Tarawad, with the families of her 4 children, her younger sister, and her family. And even when living away in Calcutta, she was in spirit in the atmosphere of that family, something so beautifully seen in her affectionate letters to her niece, Dr. Suvarna Nalapat. But what is important is to see how most of the 80 poems she wrote on motherhood, domesticity, and themes of the family had been placed in the larger context of Vasudhaiva Kudumbagam or Lokame Taravada, which means in Malayalam, the whole world being one family. Her poetry, though, contains some of the salient features of Western Romanticism, but is essentially Indian, like that of other important Indian poets, as Sachidanandan says. I quote, it developed its own styles from the exposure to the Western models with particular linkages to their time and place or their intensity. Quotes close. Her poetry was strongly influenced by Gandhian and socialist thoughts imbibed during her childhood, proceeding on to social awareness and abhorrence of violence, its spiritual energy making her vision of motherhood to embrace universality. Her affection, compassion, and devotion are merged with the ultimate being, turns everything she touches sacred, where even tending to an infant becomes a ritual of worship that makes the spirit transcendent. As also the hovels on the roadside becoming places of worship, owing to the sweet lisping talk of adorable young children. Also, almost all her poems touch upon eternal values, one way or the other. The spirit of dharma or righteous action, self sacrifice, generosity, empathy, and compassion run deep roots in her sensibility and are given expression through her poetry. Eternal values, Puranic themes, poetic monologues. Some of our Puranic heroes are Parashurama, Mahabali, Shibi, Mahavira, Bhishma, Adisandra, Yayadi, etc. Let us see how she presents some of her important Puranic heroes in her monologue poems. In the poem Mahabali, the Asura king who surrendered everything to Vamana avatar of Mahavishnu, addresses that moment of sacrifice as a quote from her own translation. O moment supreme, it lights up my soul like the flame of a votive lamp, and other things fade and fail. This indeed seems most precious of all that I have earned in a long and abundant life. This morning, amidst the lights of sacrificial fires, the immanent one reveals himself to me. In the story of the axe, the character Parashurama appears before us with a wound inflicted on his shoulder and figuratively within his heart by his own weapon, the battle axe. As he sits in deep meditation on the seashore, the images of his mother, who died at his own hands at the command of his father, the sage Jamadagni, succumbing to the dictates of traditional Moors, and his own father killed owing to his own fault, and countless lives that fell prey to the vendetta of his acts. His final resolution is this. I quote from the translation by N.K. Session. I took that weapon from my shoulder and flung it far away. I would acquire a land without violence. I would smooth this code of justice. My sublime powers, strengthened by penance, shall in future be utilized for creation and not for distraction. As I sat still, immersed in meditation, years became seconds in the concentration of creative will. Close, close. In this poem, Balamani Amma is implicitly skeptical of employing violence in any form, even by the state, as a solution to anything. And then just see how this poem ends and how contemporary and valid it is even today, even more so than then. How long should a man live to realize his mistakes? With moist eyes, I look up at my countrymen. Their hearts stamped with my axis tip, were violently furious, surly, cross, distraught, but brave, were tossed in the cradle of passions. Again, the guilt is mine. What but strife can emerge from the conflux of the powers of the Brahmin and the Kshatriya? Of course. Vibhishana is another poem in this series. The Vibhishana we meet in this poem is not the righteous Asura king who feels fulfilled after being crowned in the place of his slain elder brother Ravana, but someone who finally regrets that even the Lord Sri Rama, whom he adored, has not been able to wed compassion with justice. I quote a portion I translated. I see my Rama in any of these people, the symbol of an intellectually acquired culture, one who hides his love like his sheath sword, who seeks to attain a name known all around the globe. Throughout the world is heard the cries of righteous war. The boom of Rama's arrow is there in the nuclear bomb blast. Oh, time, will the intellect also be defeated in your experiment like the heart did long ago? So also is Vishwamitra, which is one of the longest poems she wrote, almost 400 lines, that tells the story of human effort through trips and falls, attaining the highest achievement. Vishwamitra, born a king, carried the Rajasic propensities like anger, jealousy, arrogance, and greed. But he was also endowed with a clear vision of who he really was and had set his mind on sublimating himself, rising above all those negativities. From Kaushika the king, he rose to become Vishwamitra, literally the friend of the universe, and attained the coveted position of an exalted Brahma Rishi. A poem which immortalizes how Vishwamitra responds to the cries of a young boy being chased by soldiers to be captured as a victim for a sacrifice, for a human sacrifice. Vishwamitra, with his eyes brimming, remembering violence of the past he had indulged in, the deer he had hunted, the horses he had sacrificed, and he feels utter remorse. The king who commissioned the sacrifice and the gods, the recipients, too are remorseful. And we today are getting reminded about the types of human sacrifices demanded by revolutionaries, despots, and governments, and seeking how killing of any kind, even for the noblest of causes, is abhorrent indeed. Srijan points out how her core philosophical speculation was a time space where violence was not indispensable, a world where justice was wedded with compassion, where authority does not clash with duty, where domestic life does not become a hindrance to the realization of the supreme reality, a world full of love nurtured by sacrifice. Balamani Amma thus rises above most Indian poets of our times with her lofty humanism, poetic genius, and sound philosophic grounding. And one is amazed by the experiences she had lived through in writing all these numerous poems, the vicissitudes of her life, the sufferings and grief that make her see how joys and sorrows are sides of the same coin. How, like I quote, chapels worn off completely except for the nails, grief like an infant who's lying on my bosom, feeding on sustenance I provide. So also old age, which becomes her friend, an agent of the divine who plucks and sorts the fruits, bitter, sour, or sweet as they may be, of the seeds one sows in this fertile world from the time of one's birth. But as has been so beautifully pointed out by Dr. Sulochana, her second daughter, in her theme-wise arrangement of her mother's poems in the final collected work she introduced and edited, this is the one, that it was through children, motherhood, and domestic life that she rises to the supreme. And even her long poems, monologues, etc., though on social and cultural themes, were clearly her way of practicing karma marga, implicitly urging and exhorting positive change and evolution of the human mind. Dr. Sulochana says that it was ultimately to derive the final truth, the jnana, that she strove through her poems. She has made the longest list, more than 130 poems, under the caption Jnana Yoga. Most of her poems are reflective of her witnessing nature, of her internal inquiry towards the realization of the absolute. And as Dr. Sulochana points out, for Balamani Amma, jnana was the supreme truth that dawned in the silence of her mind, with knowledge about death being the most important one. Death, of which Balamani Amma was not afraid at all and does not constantly dwell on, is another important theme for her. In some of her poems, the daytime is described as life, but in many others, it is life after death. In her elegy Lokantarangalil, or in different words, written in 1954 on the death of her uncle, she says, our tears should not flow like the river Vaitarani across this journey towards the other world. She advised her children similarly at the time of the death of her husband, their father, 23 years later in 1977. Tragically, however, by the death of her eldest son, Dr. Mohandas, in 1990, coincided with her forgetfulness, progressing slowly into the Alzheimer's disease that set in 1999 and obliterated her memory altogether. And yet, her beliefs and her poetry had exemplified her existence as of a witness on the Satchi Bhava, with which she, the inveterate introvert that she was, had witnessed her life, as well as major epochs, upheavals, advancements, and regressions of the 20th century, having been born in 1909 and passing away in 2004, the last 5 years spent in a state of total oblivion. One of the most touching poems she wrote is Nivedyam, or Offering. This is a very short, simple poem published in 1986. The poem contemplates on the love between God, nature, and man, and touches upon the deeply felt spiritual impulses of the individual sadhaka. It delineates the spiritual evolution of the speaking subject from a child to an adult and finally to a realized being. I have translated this poem, which I'm reciting now. Nivedyam, Offering, 1986. As I began to become self aware somewhat, you hid yourself in a smooth stone inside the sanctum. I kept specially for you the well water and the flower grown in the garden. Your voice was heard frequently among those who had moved along the alley. I burned the fragrant incense for you, and I brushed clean the wicks in the Nalapat, which is the Kerala lamp, the standing lamp. Problem. May I offer myself in front of you, O infinite Purusha who entered my inner courtyard and sat down as dusk ended and moonshine flowed. This, I hope, is a fitting ending to a tribute to such a divine human poetic presence in the firmament of Indian literature. Thank you. Did I keep the time, Basan?
How wonderful! How wonderful! I just can't believe how you could have squeezed an
Yes.
entire 2-hour presentation into
Right.
into
Yes.
into 25 minutes.
Yes.
25. Okay, my God.
Very well.
My God. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of everyone of us in Srijan.
Yeah.
What
Is Dr.
what?
Sulochana here? Has Dr.
Yes.
Sulochana signed in?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, she
I
is.
Yeah, just,
I
yeah.
love it. The poem I wanted to recite if there was time.
There is
Nivedita.
enough time,
Yeah.
Sulochana, for you. I mean,
I hold the copyright of most of Balamani Amma works. People write like print for permission to print her books. Requests are invariably for earlier motherhood poems. She got stamped of motherhood, but she traveled so far from there, from that motherhood poems, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of her life. So naturally, she wrote about her children and motherhood and all that. And she had this Nalapat Narayana Menon, who was a writer, philosopher, theosophist. He was with the Theosophical Society in Madras. He is the person who nurtured her talent, actually, this uncle, grand uncle of ours. So Nalapat was her, the whole education. She never went to school. The education was from this uncle. And he used to write, and whatever he wrote that day, I believe he used to come in the evening and read it out to, then there were only two ladies. My sister Kamla Das has written in Malayalam, in Nalapat, there was Narayana Menon, 3 grandmothers, and Mahatma Gandhi. She has written that. Mahatma Gandhi's photograph is there in all the rooms. So, and then she wanted to learn English to read Tagore. So that way, she was really nurtured, and she asked for a tutor to come and teach her English so that she can learn English, so that she can, read Tagore. And when the proposal came, may I say this? When the marriage proposal came, everybody, these 3 old ladies and my grand uncle, so they were discussing what to do. This girl she hasn't gone some back of the way village from only she had seen till then. She was 19 when she got married, and they were all worried about sending her to far off city called Calcutta. But then one old lady, one grandmother is supposed to have said, doesn't matter, it's okay. Tagore is there, no? She thought it's like Punayurkulam, different 3-4 houses, 5 houses will be there, and everybody knew each other. So Tagore is there, we won't worry. So let her be. So they all went 4 days train journey. They went to Calcutta. About 2 cars full of people landed in Calcutta when the bride went to Calcutta. That's just one story that I wanted to tell you. And then about this motherhood stamp on Balamani Amma. I have a grouse about that. This our poet Mahakavi Akitam is a poet who was Jnanpith awardee, passed away, say 2 years back only. So in the Shashtipurti souvenir of my mother, this man has written, everybody is talking about this motherhood thing. So to me also, whenever somebody wants to print some or write something, they all want motherhood poems only. So Akitam has written in the souvenir, she's 60 years old now. You can't keep on asking a lady, 60-year-old lady, to keep on suckling the child. He said that. So sometimes that has to come end, and then she really progressed so far. And with this poem, the 3 stages of initially seeing the God in the black stone in the Sanctum Sanctorum. And in the 3rd stage, she got out of the temple. Then she heard people talking all around. She is in the house. She's not in the temple anymore. And there are people moving on the bylanes, and she hears the voices. She hears God's voice in those voices. And then ultimately, as dusk falls, the moonlight streams into her heart, and there Paramapurusha, he came and God came and sat there. She didn't go to God, God came and sat there. That was the ultimate. What else do you want in life? That is the distances that Balamani Amma traveled, or Balamani Amma paddled with her pen from Uttotilatum Jananiye to where Paramapurusha, and what is she giving him at that time? What is the puja that she is doing? The puja is sweetened, the offering is thought, word, and deed sweetened with love. That is what she's giving. So, did I overdo something?
Not at all. I wish there was more time and we could go on listening to you, Sulu. It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you,
Very welcome.
Yes.
Thomas. I loved your, this thing. That thank you so much that I wanted to tell you, brought out. Yeah.
There's another guest of ours who I now invite, please, Suvarna. And, I can't personally, because my introduction to Nalamani was actually after seeing Suvarna's blog, and I got fascinated because of all that she's written, that lovely blog. And it just I can't get over all that she has written. I would invite her. She is a pathologist, a professor, a poet, a translator, a philosopher, also a metaphysician who is adept in the Vedas. And of course, she told me how close she was. One of her blogs contains a number of letters that Balamani has written to her, and she has thoughtfully translated from Malayalam to English, and unbelievable treasures. So it is, of course, Sulu, who's unfolded a lot to us. She gave us Xerox copies of the only 30 poems written by her, translated by her into English. And she gave us, especially to taste, that long poem, The Story of the Axe. And I can't forget how that poem progresses and ends. Of course, Sulu, of course, Madhav or Monu, who is not yet here, he must have got lost somewhere. But he also wanted to share something. But,
Basant, sorry, here I am. I came very early, as a matter of fact.
oh, where?
1 day earlier,
Oh,
as you know.
Madhav is here. How lovely,
Thank you.
Monu.
God bless you.
Monu AJ Thomas here. Good evening.
Hi, AJ. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm
so
fine.
beautiful.
I'm fine.
You're, so beautiful.
Yeah,
you heard me?
Basant, I just
You-
want half a minute. I just want to say two things. One is, Mama, she lived in Calcutta with my grandfather and the kids, including my mother, and she loved the place. And I can see everybody here understands why. And the second thing is, all I can say about her, she was one of the most forgiving and compassionate human beings ever possible, if I may say so. If she knew you, whatever you did, however, whatever it was, you can be certain that there's one person in the world who would forgive you. That person was Balamani Amma. So she was the most forgiving person I've seen. And I also want to end this by saying, I think one of the prime movers behind her becoming a poet, behind her, she's always a poet, but behind her, the way that the wings of poetry spread and spread, was my grandfather. He encouraged her tremendously. Tremendously. He was very proud of her. Very proud of her writing, very proud of her poetry. And I would say that that was a huge, if I may say so, for me, I could see the synergy between them. And therefore, I would say, for her to be I'm sure that Sulethi will agree to this. I think my grandfather, has to, basically gave a complete and loving and unstinted support. The same unstinted support and forgiveness that my grandmother has given every human being she met in her life. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and God bless all of you. God bless Calcutta. God bless the society. And thank you so much for remembering the most forgiving and compassionate soul I have ever come across in my life.
So lovely of you, Madhav. You won't know that he is the son of a very fond lady who was also nominated for the Nobel, I believe, Kamala Das, who is known as also other names like Madhavi Kutti and Kamala Suraya. We do admire your mother, Madhav, and all of us are extremely grateful for you having said so. May I please now invite Suvarna to say a few words, please.
Thank you everyone for giving such an opportunity to be with all of you. What I have to say about Valiyamma, that is Balamani Amma, is that she is the most soft personality. To say that she loves everybody, that thing is not possible for all of us, no? Not even your children, not even your household people, that she loves everybody. Even from the very beginning, you can see that in her poems. Everybody say that she is a mother poet, grandmother poet and all. I always was saying that it's a philosophy behind her. That motherliness, that grandmotherly love, whatever love she has is because of that very strong and silent philosophy within her. Actually, we can see that in her one of the earliest poems itself, that only when I can love the entire universe, then only your life will become respectable. That is what she tells that child. That means even in that motherly love for a small baby, she is including the love for the entire universe. That is her philosophy from the beginning to end. So that love, that universal love, that forgiveness, whatever comes, all from that strong philosophy. And I think that she imbibed from that, as Sulochana said, that great person, that is Nalapat Narayan Menon. He had that personality in him. Actually, he used to even love me. I was just a child while he was alive. But he was very soft to me, even when I do some naughty things. Valiyamma showed the same softness to me when I was a kid. You have read that letters, no? How seriously she is telling me how to write the poem, this and that and all.
Yeah, I can't believe it, because in that, and they said you must use your word properly. It should be the word you want. Your expression has to be I mean, it was unbelievable telling you, Suvarna, that this is the way a poem should be written. That's the way a poetry should be written. So
that is grooming a child to the poetry. This thing. She is actually my guru, and Nalapat Narayan Menon, we call it, the Paramaguru, Guru, Paratpara Guru, like that. So both Balamani Amma and Narayana Menon had been my gurus in my life, both in philosophy as well as in poetical, everything. And everybody talked about that 4 lines, that Hassodungave Nilavugumen, Agattalatil Vaniruna in Munil, Paramapurusha, Nivediketyan, Mano, Vajak Kriyamathrami Annam. These 4 lines, nobody can forget that type of beautiful lines when she was in Alzheimer's dementia. I just recited these 4 lines to her, just to see, I'm a music therapist also, but whichever person loses memory, whatever they like, we have to give. Not going and saying that I am this very, that one. So I gave these 4 lines just to see how much her brain is picking up. She said something very, very special to me. She said, "Oh, beautiful poem. Since this is so beautiful, it must be Vallatol food." She has forgotten that it is her poem, but she has not forgotten that it is a good poem and Vallatol is a good poet. See, so the brain is working. That is our job, to find out and analyze and clean. So I understood that it is going, but it is not fully gone. So that type of poetry she has written, nobody can match that. And that is what I think. Not because she is my guru, but just like that, because full of softness, full of love for the entire creation, entire universe, she had in her mind, in her brain. And losing that was actually that last days. I don't have to say that Sulochana had experienced that pain. And we have been experiencing that pain every day with those final days. But even then, we knew that she is at that Paramapurusha's lap. She has lost all the pains from this mundane world, and she has reached that Paramapurusha even before all of us have even thought about it. So in this August meeting, I actually am happy that I could pay a homage, what you call a dakshina, to my Guru. That is all what I can say about this. Thank you all very much.
Actually,
Thank you, Suvarna.
when my father passed away, the body is laid out in our house. So I was okay. Amma never cried, not a drop of tear. I suddenly just sort of broke down a little bit, no? Then she said, she touched me like this, and she said, "Don't cry, let him go. Allow him to go." So he said, don't call him back, let him go, he said.
Actually, that is what she wrote in Logandarangalil also, when my uncle died. Logandarangal is that simple philosophy. I think I have gave it to you, that blog, no? That is the philosophy which our ancestors had given us, no?
Yes, absolutely.
She's actually the Indian philosophy. She had, what do you call it, taken in like anything. That is why she became so soft in heart.
Lovely, all of you. How can Srijan thank you all? Madhav, Sulu, and Suvarna. It's not possible for us to see the offspring of such a lovely human being who we got introduced only, actually thanks to our coordinator, our poetry coordinator, Anjana Boshu. Because if it was not for her, CP Surendran would not be there. If it was not for her, CP led us to AJ, and then Satchidanandan. So it was actually thanks to Anjana alone that we have now finally stepped southward. And I do hope that this journey of ours will continue, and that you would have more and more poets from South India who would be able to admire. But thank you, all of you. My clock says 7 o'clock, and we have to now switch over to the poetry group, where these lovely poets who have gathered today are going to read their poems to us. We always say that the first half, which is the tribute part, in which we think of these lovely poets, is just like a national anthem. Like you recite the national anthem before any nice event happens. So it is more like that, a national anthem, that we think of such great poets, and we are very, very thankful to Thomas and to everyone else to be able to present that to us. May I step across now to the second half and hand it over to our lovely anchor. Maybe he could greet Suvarna and Sulu and Thomas and everyone with some few words in Malayalam, so that they feel nice. And from our chapbook that Raju, who was actually qualified as a civil engineer, and then he went on to head the Max Muller for all of 30 years or odd. And ever since Srijan was born, he was behind us in every respect, so that we could get a glimpse of German culture in Srijan. And a keen debater, he chairs meetings, he judges meetings. He was also the All India General Secretary of the Federation of Film Societies. He is, please do look at him, because I can't help saying that he heads our film adda also. So the reason why I said this was that. And of course, he does everything which Srijan needs, including advisors that after our president passed away, we must have Uma Das Gupta as our next president. So it was Raju who said, "Oh, we have Uma. So why do you have to worry?" So that, Raju, I present, and please, Raju, take over and lead the second half of the evening. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Basant. I hope I'm audible. A very, very good evening to all of you present here on this call. Namaskar, namaskar, and namaskaram to all those who have joined us from south of the Vindhyas. Wonderful presentation by Dr. A.J. Thomas. Wonderful to hear whatever he had to say about Balamani Amma, and of course all the anecdotes which were narrated by the descendants of the family too. Great. We have all got enlightened in some way. There are some films you must have seen sometimes in which certain characters make an entry only after the intermission. Mine is such a case here over here, but we shall get on with whatever is on the agenda for the second half. Basant has a wonderful way of writing scripts, you see. So he has already said that I should tell something in Malayalam. I'm not capable of doing that. I can only say, Malayalam paranjal manslahum, pakshe parayan sadikilla. Okay. So that is the only line I can tell in Malayalam. I do understand a lot of Malayalam, of course. If you throw me into some part of Kerala, after 4 or 5 days, I will understand. And any film of Mammootty or Mohanlal, which my wife keeps watching and which I sneak into as from the side, I do understand most of it in any case, right? We have a galaxy of poets this evening to present their poems, and we shall go in some kind of an order. You know, we have not made any fixed agenda for that, depending on who is here on the call and on the kind of lots that are drawn in my mind. Okay, so I would like to first actually move on to Geet Chaturvedi ji, because I can see him right here in front. Yeah, and a big thank you to Priyankar Paliwal ji for introducing Geet Chaturvedi ji to the Srijan Poetry Adda. And Geet Chaturvedi ji was born in 1977 in Mumbai. He now lives in Bhopal and is one of the most widely read contemporary literary authors in Hindi. Not just a poet, but also a short story author, lyricist, screenwriter, a novelist, and a critic. In his 11 books are 2 collections of novellas and 3 of poems. His Nyuntam Mein and Khushiyon Ke Guptachar, written in 2019, are included in bestseller lists even today. His essays on literature, cinema, and music, collected in Table Lamp and Adhuri Cheezon Ka Devta, are seminal. Now, he is an avant-garde writer, and there is a lot more about him to say. You have it all in the chapbook, so that I don't eat into his poetry time. I would just like to add that his works have been translated into 22 languages worldwide. And that is the kind of reach that he has. And Words Without Borders, Chicago Review, The Offing, Modern Poetry in Translation, and elsewhere are places where his poetry has reached. So, Geet Chaturvedi ji, the microphone is all yours. So, shuru kijiye. Each poet is actually allotted about 5 minutes, depending on whether you choose a long poem or a short poem. You can fit in 2, or if it's a long poem, then only 1. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Raju ji, and thank you very much for inviting me to this lovely and graceful event. Thank you, Srijan, Poetry Adda, Uma ji, Basant ji, Krishna ji, Priyankar ji, and thank you very much, A.J. Thomas, for your wonderful presentation. It was enlightening about Balamani Amma. Now I will read a couple of my poems, and then 1 poem in English translation done by Anita Gopalan. First poem is, मैं सुनता हूँ, मैं सुनता हूँ, सुनता हूँ, सुनता हूँ, ये बोलते हुए मैं सुनता हूँ।
बहुत अच्छे, बहुत अच्छे, बहुत अच्छे।
मैं सुनता हूँ, सुनता हूँ, सुनता हूँ, ये बोलते हुए मैं सुनता हूँ। सुनना एक तरह का न्याय है, जिसे वे नहीं समझ पाते, बोलने के उन्माद में जिन्होंने किसी को नहीं सुना। सिर्फ गाने से ही नहीं बरसता मल्हार, सिर्फ गाने से ही नहीं बरसता मल्हार, सुनने से भी जल जाते हैं दीपक। सुनना शामिल होना है, फिर भी बोलते हुए के हुजूम में कितना कमतर आका सुनना। सबसे दुर्लभ गीत वही याद रखते हैं जिन्होंने बेहद खामोशी से उसे सुना। सुनने से जिंदा हो जाती हैं कहानियां, जलधारा नदी कहलाई क्योंकि हमने उसके नाद को सुना। जैसे रूमी कहता था, जैसे रूमी कहता था, कोई सुन रहा है इस खुशी में मुर्दे भी जाग उठते हैं। कोई सुन रहा है इस खुशी में मुर्दे भी जाग उठते हैं। क्या बात। एक कविता है जो कि 6 हिस्सों में, लेकिन मैं पहला हिस्सा पढ़ूंगा। वो है एक कश्मीरी बच्चे के खत। एक कश्मीरी बच्चा है, चिट्ठी लिख रहा है यहाँ के लोगों को कि ले जाओ ये जमीन, पेड़, पहाड़, नदियां और बर्फ जिनके लिए तुम बम फोड़ते हो। ले जाओ ये जमीन, पेड़, पहाड़, नदियां और बर्फ जिनके लिए तुम बम फोड़ते हो। ये सब कहीं न कहीं मिल जाएंगे मुझे, पिता फिर कहीं नहीं मिलेंगे। जिस जगह गाड़े थे मैंने अपने दूध के दांत, उसी जगह गाड़ आया हूं पिता को। धमाके के बाद जिनकी सिर्फ उंगली मिली थी, शादी की अंगूठी से पहचाना था मां ने। धमाके के बाद जिनकी सिर्फ उंगली मिली थी, शादी की अंगूठी से पहचाना था मां ने। उनकी बाकी देह को मैंने कल्पना में दफन किया, जैसे बाकी देह को स्मृति में प्यार करूंगा। सुना है मर के पिता पेड़ बन जाते हैं, छांव देते हैं। सुना है मर के पिता पेड़ बन जाते हैं, छांव देते हैं। मेरे पिता उंगली बन गए जो उठती रहेगी तुम्हारी ओर, मिट्टी के नीचे से खामोश जागती सोचती हुई उंगली, खामोश जागती सोचती। शुक्रिया। और एक कविता क्या मैं सीधे अंग्रेजी में पढ़ दूं, अंग्रेजी अनुवाद में, ताकि हिंदी और अंग्रेजी दोनों में पढ़ने का समय बच जाए।
हाँ
राजू
पढ़
जी,
दीजिए, पढ़ दीजिए।
ठीक है, शुक्रिया। ये है द मेमोरी ऑफ नाउ, ये मॉडर्न पोएट्री इन ट्रांसलेशन में छपी थी। इसका ट्रांसलेशन किया है अनीता गोपालन, माय वंडरफुल ट्रांसलेटर। Downstairs I left a candle burning. In its light I'll read a few lines when I return. By the time I return, the candle had burned out. Those few lines had faded like innocence. You walk with me the way moon walks along with a child sitting in a train window. I stood in the balcony one day, waved a handkerchief toward the sky. Those who have gone without saying their goodbyes will recognize it even from far. In my handkerchief, they have left behind their tears, the way early humans left behind their etchings on cave walls. Lyotard said, every sentence is a now. No, actually, it's a memory of now. Every memory is a poem. In our books, the count of the unwritten poems is so much more, so much more. Thank you. Thank you very much, Srijan Poetry Adda. Thank you very much.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद गीत
बहुत
चतुर्वेदी
धन्यवाद।
जी। बहुत अच्छा लगा सुन के। मैं सुनता हूँ, खास आज के ज़माने में सभी यही कहते कि मैं सुनता हूँ, तब हमारे बहुत सारी समस्याओं का समाधान हो जाता।
बिल्कुल यकीनन।
और जैसे कि आपने बहुत सही कहा है कि सुनना यानी शामिल होना, तो मैं तो एक स्टेप आगे कहूंगा कि नहीं सुनना अपराध है। तो इसी को लेके हम आगे बढ़ते हैं। तो ऐसा कविता आपने सुनाया कि कुछ देर के लिए मैं नहीं समझ पाया कि कविता थी या गीत था।
थैंक यू।
Up we move on to the next poet, and I see that we have already on the call here Mr. Devdulal Panja, whose nom de plume is Nagsen. So Devdulal বাবু আছেন তো কলে? একটু আনমিউট করুন নিজেকে, আমি আপনার সম্বন্ধে দু একটা কথা বলবো। So Devdulal Panjaji was born in 1969 in the exotically beautiful Sagar Island near the coast of the Bay of Bengal. He is from Kakdwip. Nagsen is the name that he uses while writing. He did his schooling in Kakdwip but completed his master's in Bengali at Bardhaman University, kicking on teaching Bengali literature after moving back to his roots in Kakdwip. But his first view of the enchanting world of Bengali literature was when he began editing magazines, Shatabdir Mukh and Kobita Ebom Kobita. His tryst with poetry has resulted in popular collections like Nirutshab, Shagota Kathan, etc. And there is a long list which you can read in the chapbook. As an editor, he has a collection of poetry, to his credit, has received a lot of critical acclaim. And a soon to be published is his literary book of interviews, Charer Nirjonataye, Akdin Mukhomukhi Rafiq, Ul Islam, and a biography of poet Samsul Haq, as well as a book of stories. So, আপনার কবিতা শুনি আমরা।
সবাইকে নমস্কার, আমার কথা শোনা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ, খুব ভালোভাবে
শব্দ শোন। সবাইকে নমস্কার, এবং আজকে সৃজন যে আমাকে আমন্ত্রণ জানিয়েছেন আমার মতো একজন সামান্য কবিকে, তাদের জন্য আমার প্রণাম, শুভেচ্ছা এবং ভালোবাসা। দুটি কবিতায় সরাসরি চলে যাই। প্রথম কবিতা এন্ডি গেন্ডিদের কথা। যৌনতার জন্য রামপ্রসাদের কোনো অশান্তি ছিল না, অশান্তি ছিল না অতীশ দীপঙ্করের। বাকি সব আমরা যারা এন্ডি গেন্ডি লোক, সমস্যা তাদের নিয়েই। ওরে আঙুলের ভালোবাসায় ভর করে আমাদের যৌনতা 16 আনা দিনরাত চকচক করতেই থাকে। বিক্রমপুরের বজ্রযোগিনী গ্রামে অপেক্ষা করে কেউ আটকায়নি পথ। দীপঙ্কর, আপনি তাই অনায়াসেই তিব্বতের দ্বিতীয় বুদ্ধ হয়ে ঘুমিয়ে পড়েন সেখানেই, সেই দূর দেশে। চাপা পড়ে নিভে গিয়ে ভেসে উঠল গীতিমাল্য হয়ে কতগুলো অশান্তির রাত, সে তো শুধু জানে একা রামপ্রসাদ সেন। সমস্যা আমাদেরই নিয়ে, যত সব এন্ডি গেন্ডি লোক আমরা আলো ও অন্ধকারের মাঝামাঝি পড়ে যৌনতাকে হয়তোবা মনে করেছিলাম বাপের সম্পত্তি আর ওড়াবো দুহাতে। এখন মানচিত্র জুড়ে লাসা আর হালি শহরের মেঘে ভেসে ভেসে আয় নিদ্রা যায় নিদ্রা, বোম বোম ভোলে ভোলে। হারানো দোতারা মধুসূদন, কবি মধুসূদনের প্রতি আমার শ্রদ্ধা ভালোবাসা। যৌনতা এত ফেলনা নয় যে সকালের বাজারের ব্যাগে করে আপনি তা বাড়ি এনে ঠেলে ফেলবেন রান্নাঘরের সামনের মেঝে। যৌনতার জন্য কম বেশি 20 বছর মধুসূদনের অনেকগুলি রাত আর অনেকগুলি মদের বোতলে একটু একটু করে ক্ষয়ে গেছে মূল্যবান আয়ু। বলা যায় না সেই আয়ু থাকলে আরো কি কি লিখতেন তিনি, আরো কজন রেবেকার সঙ্গে তার দেখা হতো একটা জীবনে। যৌনতার জন্য রাতের 5 স্ট্রিটে হাঁটতে হাঁটতে ভোর ডেকে এনেছেন কেউ। ওয়াটগঞ্জের দিকে এখন আর কোনো ট্রাম যায় না, যৌনতারও নেই কোনো পিতৃদত্ত নাম। মধুসূদন থেকে হায়াত রিজেন্সির করিডোর, খেয়াঘাট থেকে সন্ধ্যা নদীর ওপর ঝুলে থাকা সেতু, আমি খুঁজে চলেছি জীবন খেপার সেই হারানো তো তারা। সবাইকে অনেক
বাহ,
কৃতজ্ঞতা।
বাহ, বাহ।
ভালো থাকবেন সবাই।
খুব ভালো, খুব ভালো লাগলো। আপনি একটা অন্য বিষয় নিয়ে আমাদের কবিতা শুনিয়েছেন, যৌনতা নিয়ে। আমরা এই ধরনের এড়ে গেড়ে লোক যে ঠিক পরিভাষাটা বুঝি না, ইন্ডি গিন্ডি আমরা ঠিক বুঝি না যে পরিভাষাটা, না এইদিকে জ্ঞান আছে বলতে পারি, না ওইদিকে জ্ঞান শূন্য বলতেও খারাপ লাগে আর কি। তো সেই জন্যই সে মাঝামাঝি আমরা আটকে রয়েছি সবসময়। খুব সুন্দর, খুব সুন্দর কবিতা। ধন্যবাদ, অনেক ধন্যবাদ আপনাকে। I would now like to travel a long distance down to Kerala. I can see Sabita Sachidanandan here on the call, who abbreviates her surname to Satchi, from Sachidanandan. So Sabita is going to tell us some of her poems. She is going to recite. And to introduce her very briefly, I would say she's a poet in English and Malayalam, an art curator, and a cultural theorist. She has taught English in Delhi University for 15 years and was a Commonwealth Scholar and a Paul Mellon Fellow. Her poems and essays have appeared in various reputed journals, including the Penguin Book of Indian Poets, etc. And of course, she was one of the 2 Indian poets in Irresurrection Ensemble, a collaborative Afro-Asian project between South African and Indian poets and musicians, directed by Ari Sitas, with 4 award-winning albums and verse booklets published from South Africa. Sabita's poems have appeared in Slovenian translation. Her poems in Malayalam have been published in all leading journals, including Mathrubhumi, Malayalam, Bhasha Poshini, Madhyamam, Kerala Kavita, etc. And nowhere has it been left out. Sabita has been invited to read her poems at important avenues, including London House, Poetry Africa, Durban, various venues in New Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, Srinagar, and the KLF in Kozhikode. Unfortunately, the list doesn't still have Calcutta, but I'm sure that's going to get added over there. So we are keen to listen to your poems, Sabita.
Thank you so much, Raju, for that very generous introduction, and a good evening to all of you. Since we are actually gathered here to pay tribute, in some sense, to pay our tribute and Shraddhanjali to who I consider also my sort of ancestral poet, Balamani Amma. I actually got to meet her only very briefly when she was already a bit unwell. But of course, I knew Kamala Das very well through my father as well. So I'm going to actually start my reading with a poem to another mother poet, who I was very close to, who I consider my ma in Kolkata, Nabonita Devsen. So this is a poem written to her when she passed away. It's called Going Home. Going Home, to Nabonita Devsen, poet, scholar, mother. What is the skin that what is the skin, the weave that unravels itself? What is this voice that turns hoarse, then falls silent? What this movement, the agitation that goes still? We leave behind words, the lingering warmth of love, the breath that joins all other breaths, the particles that disperse to make others. You have made us, you make us. You are the earth, needed while moist, formed in fire, kindled by air that joins air, reborn every moment. Nabonita. You are the mother, you return to mother. Sita, free at last from testimonies of mere men, remembers the plough, recalls the earth of which she is born, knows that Bhumi has infinite room in her lap to hold her. I'll read a very short poem which I've written to my father. This is actually from a series. It's a long series of 8 poems actually called Letters to Father. This is the third fragment. Kites on so this whole series is actually to my father Satchidanandan. Fragment 3, Kites on 15th August. Kites flying overhead, father, like only kites can do. Controlled, yet soaring beyond boundary walls, yet entangled with each other, terminal. And we must still sing the freedom songs, the voice hoarse, the lines crooked, tuneless. In her white handspun and broken spectacles, I remember grandmother. The third poem also is from a series. This is the second last. It's a very short 5-line poem actually. This is also from a series called Travels to Hereafter. Now, my book actually Hereafter is which came out last year. This is named after that series, Travels in the Hereafter, which I wrote as a series after very extensive travels in Egypt. So I'll read the most obvious poem probably from the series, which is on pyramids. Pyramids, geometry. The first dimension to touch grounded depth. The second, to navigate the sea of oblivion. The third, so that you will be nourished on stones, these eternal stones, the keys to the geometry of immortality. I'd like to end with another last short poem, if I may. Also because, I mean, this is from the Penguin Book of Indian Poets, which just came out, edited by Geet. So in that, actually, again, I have a series. I have a kind of habit of writing series poems. I'll read one short poem from that, which I'd like to read here also because it evokes Jibananand Das's poetry. So this one is called Leftover. It's a series called Exodus. And this is one of the poems, Leftover. A snake slithers. Water rises in the boat. Silver fins flicker and flash. Raised oars slash borders with swift cuts. He sets afloat on the river the choking dread as more lines are cut. Oars take another river's name. Acta R Nadir Nam, right? So rivers take another river's, oars take another river's name. In notes of Komal Gandhar, a whale rises. Where is home? Where my dancing village green? Where the shimul trees, mottled refuge on my front yard? He carries walls on his head. Left over in his bundle are just lines of a boat. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Srijan. Poetry Adda, this is lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Savita. Now that you have evoked through your poems, you have evoked Nobhanita Devsen, you have evoked Jibanananda Das, and also Komal Gandhar. So your actual performance in Calcutta cannot be very far behind now.
I hope not.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for these wonderful.
Raju, I'll just share one thing.
Yeah.
Her poem on her father, I mean, she confessed this morning that the place where she is now, but you can see behind her, is her father's room.
Mm-hmm.
So I could, when you were reading that poem on your father, I felt as if he was right there behind you and you were talking to him. So lovely of you, Savita.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks for adding that early morning exchange, Basant. Thank you. I would now like to move on to Vidya Bhandariji. Yes, I can see her on the call. Vidya Bhandari was born in 1945 in princely Jodhpur. Her interest in literature drove her to obtain a master's in Hindi. She then came to Calcutta as a housewife. Nowadays, you call them homemakers. Married to a professional who loved poetry, a reason why poetry flowers in her despite the roles she fulfills. Sensitive that her poetry is, she has read not just at countless Kavi Sammelans, but also for All India Radio and the television, and her published poems collected in many anthologies as also short stories, and has been translated into Oriya, Bangla, and English. Active in cities' reputed literary and cultural organizations for over 5 decades, and recently in online platforms like Saityaki and Rasnakar, she promotes and encourages poetry and literature, actively heading them at a secretary or a president. Also, in those that look after destitute children, especially from red light areas. So, Vidyaji, the microphone is all yours.
सबको मेरा नमस्कार। सृजन को बहुत आभार प्रकट करती हूँ कि मुझे आमंत्रित किया। कविता शुरू कर रही हूँ। समुद्र और अकेलापन। समुद्र और अकेलापन। अकेलापन नहीं होता खाली होना। अकेलापन नहीं होता खाली होना। सागर किनारे, आकाश, हवा, पानी, रंगीन लहरें सभी तो समा जाती हैं अकेलेपन के समुद्र में। हाँ, संवेदनाएं, भावनाएं, आत्म मंथन तभी तो भर जाती हैं अकेलेपन में। पिघल जाता है भीतर का सारा अवसाद। पिघल जाता है भीतर का सारा अवसाद। लेने लगता है हिलोरें रंगीन लहरों के साथ। अकेलापन समुद्र हो जाता है जिसमें सारी सीपियां आ जाती हैं झोली में। अकेलापन समुद्र हो जाता है जिसमें सारी सीपियां आ जाती हैं झोली में, और स्वयं को पहचानने की प्रक्रिया शुरू हो जाती है। और प्रक्रिया स्वयं को पहचानने की प्रक्रिया शुरू हो जाती है। मैंने स्त्री पर अधिक कविताएं लिखी हैं। पुस्तकें भी मेरी स्त्री पर ही हैं। एक स्त्री और पौरुष पे एक कविता है। स्त्री और पौरुष। तुम्हारे पौरुष के पांव जिंदा हैं। तुम्हारे पौरुष के पांव जिंदा हैं, क्योंकि मैंने पांवों को समेट कर रखा है रेशम के कीड़ों की तरह।
बहुत अच्छे, बहुत अच्छे।
तुम्हारे पौरुष की आंखें जिंदा हैं, क्योंकि मेरी आंखें झुकी हुई हैं शर्मीली दुल्हन की तरह। तुम्हारा पौरुष जिंदा है, क्योंकि मैंने मेरी अस्मिता को छुपा रखा है आंचल में। तुम्हारा सिर ऊंचा है हिमालय की तरह, क्योंकि मुझ में समर्पण भाव है नदी की तरह। तुम्हारे पौरुष की ऊंची आवाज बरकरार रही। तुम्हारे पौरुष की ऊंची आवाज बरकरार रही, क्योंकि मैंने मौन की भाषा अपना ली है मुन्नी की तरह। मैंने प्रतिरोध को अपना मित्र नहीं बनाया। मैंने प्रतिरोध को अपना मित्र नहीं बनाया, इसलिए जिंदा है तुम्हारा पौरुष। सुनो सुनो, मैं हूं केवल एक एहसास। सुनो, मैं हूं केवल एक एहसास। मैं हूं तुम्हारी सांसें। मुझे महसूस करो, मुझे महसूस करो।
बहुत खूब, बहुत खूब।
एक और स्त्री पर ही लिखी हुई है। यदि पढ़ना चाहते हो मुझे तो पढ़ो कोमल आंखों से। यदि पढ़ना चाहते हो मुझे तो पढ़ो कोमल आंखों से, जैसे पढ़ी जाती है गीता शुद्ध भावों से। और छूना चाहते हो मुझे, छूना चाहते हो मुझे तो छुओ चिड़िया के कोमल बच्चे के पकड़ने की अदा से। छूना चाहते हो मुझे तो छुओ चिड़िया के कोमल बच्चे के पकड़ने की अदा से, जैसे छूती है हवा धीरे से फूलों को। जैसे छूती है हवा धीरे से फूलों को जैसे कोमल हाथों से छुआ जाता है तुलसी को, जैसे
वाह।
कोमल हाथों से छुआ जाता है तुलसी को। बस ऐसे ही कोमल हाथों से, कोमल आंखों से, कोमल भावों से पढ़ो मुझे। मेरा कहा अनकहा पढ़ो, मेरा कहा अनकहा पढ़ो, मेरा भाव अभाव पढ़ो, तल्लीन होकर पढ़ो, तल्लीन होकर।
वाह वाह, बहुत खूब, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपको।
हाँ।
आपने अकेलेपन से शुरू किया और इतना सुंदर तरीके से जो ऐसी कविताएं सुनाई आपने, जो छूने में भी कैसे भाव आ सकते हैं, हवा जैसे छुए, जैसे तुलसी पत्ता हम उठाएं। तो बहुत 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 खूब, दिल बहलाने वाली कविताएं हैं ये। वी डोंट हैव एनीबडी। हाँ, प्रियंकर जी हैं क्या कॉल में?
जी जी रमन जी।
हाँ हाँ हाँ, अब कहाँ छुप के बैठे रहते हैं, आइए ना, प्रकट होइए ना यहाँ पर। हाँ, सिर्फ बसंत जी को दिखाई देते हैं, हमको दिखाई नहीं देते।
नहीं, अब मैं सबको दिखाऊं।
अच्छा ठीक है। तो आपको बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। ये सब हिंदी पोएट्स जो आप सृजन के साथ जोड़ देते हैं, इसमें वैल्यू एडिशन हो जाता है सृजन पोएट्री क्लब का। सो आपने सुना कविताएं, तो 2 शब्द अगर कहना चाहें आप।
हिंदी के जो दोनों कवि थे, आपने उनकी कविताएं सुनी। गीत के लिए मैं कहूंगा कि गीत हमारे उन कवियों में से हैं जिनको पढ़कर भाषा से लगाव बढ़ता है और जिन्हें प्रस्तुत करके भाषा के प्रति गौरव बोध होता है। और विद्या जी तो हमारी वरिष्ठ कवित्री हैं, और दोनों कवि आए और उन्होंने आपको हिंदी कविता का जो आस्वाद है वो आपके सामने रखा। तो मैं उनके प्रति आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ और उम्मीद करता हूँ कि सृजन में इसी तरह भारत की विभिन्न भाषाओं के कवि आते रहेंगे और हम उन कविताओं का आनंद लेंगे। आप सबके प्रति बहुत बहुत आभार।
नमस्कार प्रियंका जी।
नमस्कार नमस्कार।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद प्रियंका जी। I would now like to move on a little eastwards. Mozid Mahmud Saib is there on the call. I think Dhaka is ahead of us in time also, so it must be dinner time for him already. So let us listen to his poems now. I would like to briefly introduce Mozid Mahmud ji. না না, আপনার ওই হ্যান্ডটা রেইজড আছে, নিচে একটা হাতের সিম্বল আছে না?
Yes, yes.
হ্যাঁ, ওটাকে আবার ক্লিক করুন, ওটা নেমে যাবে। হ্যাঁ, থ্যাংক ইউ। কারণ এটা কনস্ট্যান্ট আপনার নামের এগেইনস্টে যদি হাত উঠে থাকে, লোকে ভাববে যে আপনি কংগ্রেস পার্টি সাপোর্ট করেন।
Okay, thanks.
Right. So Mozid Saib was born in 1966 in Chargorgori, a village near PADMA, where he grew up. He crossed the Padma River for his MA from the University of Dhaka in 1986, and in 1996 had been awarded a research grant by the Nazrul Institute. Mozid is an author with more than 50 titles already, and I'm not going through the names of that you have in your chapbook. After working as a journalist for various dailies and news organizations, he set up his own non-profit organization and has been working for over 2 years for social advancement causes. A noted scholar on Qazi Nazrul Islam, he has been awarded the Rabindra Nazrul Literary Prize in 2006, the National Press Club Award in 2008, the Bengali Writers Honours in London in 2010, and the Binoy Majumdar Literary Award in 2011. Recently, his fiction and essays have appeared in Singapore Unbound, Provenance Journal, Indian Quarterly, Borderless, and in Commonwealth Writers Adda Forum. Many of his works have been translated into English, Chinese, Hindi, and Ulala French too. So let us listen to Mozid, Janab Mozid Mahmud.
Thank you everybody. I would like to read 2 poems. First poem calls name Apple Kahini, Fable of the Apple. Apple Kahini. সৃষ্টির শুরুতে তুমি একটি অখণ্ড আপেলের মতো ছিলে। সৃষ্টির শুরুতে তুমি একটি অখণ্ড আপেলের মতো ছিলে, চতুর্দিকে ছড়িয়ে পড়েছিল তোমার রক্তিম গণ্ডের আভা। অরণ্যের মধ্যে হাজারো গিরিপথ অতিক্রম করে তুমি সমুদ্রের দিকে নামতে থাকলে। তোমার এই একাকী যাত্রা বড় কঠিন ছিল। তুমি কোন দিকে যাবে? বামে গেলে ডান, ডানে গেলে বাম, বড় অরক্ষিত হয়ে পড়ে। তোমার যাত্রা সমুদ্র, অরণ্য, মরুভূমি ও পর্বতের দিকে। তোমার ইচ্ছে হলো বামগালকে দেখার। তোমরা পরস্পর কথা বলতে থাকলে ঈশ্বর একটি ধারালো ছুরি দিয়ে তোমার শরীরকে সমান দুভাগ করে দিল, আর সঙ্গে সঙ্গে তোমরা হয়ে উঠলে এক ও অদ্বিতীয়। এবং কেউ কাউকে তোয়াক্কা না করে দুই বিপরীত মেরুর দিকে ছুটতে থাকলে। সেই থেকে তোমার শরীর হতে গড়িয়ে পড়ছে লাল রক্তের ধারা। অসম্ভব যন্ত্রণায় তোমরা দূর থেকে পরস্পরকে দেখতে থাকলে, অথচ তোমার শরীরের সঙ্গে এত সুখ ও সৌন্দর্য ছিল তুমি জানতে পারোনি, কেননা তোমার পিঠ ছিল পিঠের সঙ্গে। তোমাদের একদিকে ছিল সমুদ্র, পর্বতের ঝর্ণাধারা, অন্যদিকে আকাশ ও মরুভূমি। এতদিন বৃথায় তোমরা ছুটছিলে, কিন্তু নিজেদের শরীর থেকে বিচ্ছিন্ন হবার পর যখন তোমরা জানলে, মরুভূমি ও সমুদ্রের মিলনের আকাঙ্ক্ষা তীব্রতর হয়ে উঠল এবং তোমাদের দুঃখিত করে তুলল। সেই থেকে বন্ধুর গিরিপথ দিয়ে অমসৃণ শরীরে গড়াতে গড়াতে প্রায়শ তোমরা ক্ষতাক্ত হয়ে উঠছ। আর কাটা হৃৎপিণ্ডের রক্তের ধারা, সমুদ্রের গর্জন, সিংহের আর্তনাদ উপেক্ষা করে পূর্ণ বিন্দুর দিকে ধাবিত হচ্ছ। কিন্তু তোমরা পুনরায় একত্রিত হবার ক্ষমতা হারিয়ে ফেলেছ। এই অক্ষমতাই তোমাদের মিলন ও ভালোবাসার গান হয়ে অরণ্য, পর্বত আর সমুদ্র অতিক্রম করে অন্ধকারের কালো বিন্দুর দিকে ধাবিত হচ্ছে। It's my first one. And second, I'm reading a second poem. It's a sharp, snake, বা সার্পেন্টার। আমি যখন বুকে ভর দিয়ে প্রাণ ভয়ে দৌড়চ্ছিলাম, তুমি তখন সরীসৃপ ছাড়া কিছু বলনি। বুকের পাঁজর সংকোচন করে হাঁটতে বেশ কষ্ট হয়। সেই সাপ জীবনের যন্ত্রণা এখনো আমি ভুলতে পারিনি। অথচ ঈশ্বরের সবুজ বাগানে তুমি দুপায়ে কি চমৎকার হাঁটছিলে। পল্লবের আড়াল থেকে আমার ঈর্ষা কেবল তোমাকে দগ্ধ করছিল। সেই থেকে আমার মনে জেগেছিল তোমার পায়ের কাছে লুটিয়ে পড়ার স্বাদ। পা না থাকার লজ্জা তুমি বুঝতে পারবে না। তবু কেবল কৌতূহল বশত হাত দিয়ে বুকের কাছটা ছুঁয়ে দিলে। জন্ম থেকেই আমার ছিল শরম লুকানো স্বভাব, কেননা মাথার বুক পেটের দিকে কি শ্রীহীন একই রকম। বড় জোর গর্তে ঢোকার সময়ে শরীরের নির্মোগ গুলো কিছুটা পাল্টে যেতে পারে, তখন পিছনের লেজ টেনে কেউ ফেরাতে পারে না। কারণ বুকে হাঁটার যন্ত্রণায় আমার মস্তিষ্কে কষ্টের বিষকণা জমা হতে থাকে। সেই গরল দাঁতের ছিদ্র পথে নির্গমন না হলে মৃত্যুর চেয়ে ভয়ঙ্কর মরণ আমাকে গ্রাস করতে থাকে। ঈশ্বর দেখে ফেলার আগেই এমন একটি লম্বমান প্রাণী তুমি কোথায় লুকাবে? তোমাকে লজ্জার হাত থেকে বাঁচাবার জন্য আমি পূর্ব নির্ধারিত গুহার মধ্যে পালিয়ে গিয়েছিলাম। অথচ তুমি তো জানো সাপ নিজে কোনো গর্ত খুঁড়তে পারে না। তবু তোমার সঙ্গে আমার এই লুকানো ক্রীড়া ঈশ্বর পছন্দ করতে পারলেন না। তাড়িয়ে দিলেন অভিশপ্ত আমাদের তার সবুজ উদ্যান থেকে, দিলেন বিচ্ছিন্নতার শাস্তি। অথচ এই বিজন বিরান মরুমৃত্তিকায় তোমাকে ছাড়া আমি কি কাউকে চিনি? কিন্তু আমি কিভাবে তোমার কাছে যাব? আমি তো পায়ের উপর দাঁড়াতে পারি না। তাই দিনের আলোতে ঘাসের নিচে লুকিয়ে রাখি পথ চলার লজ্জা। রাত এলে তোমার খোঁজে একে বেঁকে বেরিয়ে পড়ি রাস্তায়।
খুব ভালো, অসাধারণ, অসাধারণ, খুব ভালো লাগলো, wonderful. At this stage, I would like to also acknowledge a fact on behalf of Srijan that from Srijan's poetry team, thanks to Ananya Banerjee for introducing Mozid, Mahmud Sahib, and Devdulal Panja Sahib to this Srijan Poetry Forum today platform. Thank you very much, Ananda. We would now like to move on to Atalant Nadkar ji. He has been waiting for a long time. I can see him on the screen here with a kind of very infectious smile. Atalant Nadkar was born in 1993 and spent his formative years in the nostalgia-driven bylanes of Kolkata before moving briefly to Ahmedabad. He then spent over 5 years of his professional career in Mumbai before getting relocated back to Kolkata in late 2021. Somebody's microphone seems to be on. Oh, okay. A reader of prose from a young age, his interest in poetry had been stimulated much later in life. Despite being a man of few words and lacking literary training, poetry as a fluid and concise medium had struck a chord, helping him to explore and express thoughts and commune with himself more truthfully. Though he is yet to find a definitive genre, is in quotes, according to him, yet to find a definitive genre. Rooted in philosophy, politics, spirituality, and music, he is working on a poetry manuscript and a collection of indie rock lyrics. He occasionally writes short stories too. His poems have appeared in News India, Dissident Voice, and Beetle magazine, and various online blogs. A former banking professional, he is currently pursuing a career as a writer and freelance marketing professional. Travel being his frequent pursuit to reinvigorate and rediscover himself. So, Atalant Nadkar, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me in such esteemed company. I'll get right to my poems. I have 2 poems lined up for today. So, hope I'm audible and visible.
Yes.
And the first one goes here. It's called The Middle Children of Poetry. The hourglass gathers dust. We congeal into formless, inflammable cloths ready to explode through time. Put your good foot forward. The labyrinthine roads to utterance await, like mazy Calcutta bylanes on a moist May afternoon when the air is too heavy to breathe. Claustrophobic and queer, the orphan at the end of the long rope has been dead for a while. His last words, scribbled with rocks on a national monument, lost under layers of betel leaf stains. The lunatic in the basement, mumbling incoherent pearls of wisdom and faith, does not try to break free anymore. Restless with every tick of the clock we rust. We are the middle children of poetry. We haven't been to the mystical hand-carved teak wonderlands that smell of old books and strong coffee, or to the hungry streets at dawn, foraging for silver scraps on mountains of trash. Empty voices, noises have cast their spells for too long. But now our entitlement awaits. A long overdue release, blue blots of grief and desire on the coarse pages of history. Go on, put your best foot forward. Thank you. And my second poem is The Last Leaf. The last leaf at the end of the world, wizened and undying on the last tree. What a pain endurance is. Protima, she cries for help, but the voice that once rose above suffering and men and the clanking of rusted shackles now whimpers. The restless river in her loins swells like the lips of an infant ready to weep. Weep cloudbursts of all the things she has but has no use for. The immortal banyan tree stands brittle in the face of the infinite storm. All its wisdom, its glory, forgotten, like the blissed face of Buddha, of her grandchildren, of herself on the other side of time. Lean on me, O deathless mother of corpses. Hold my hand until the end, till the edge of the last ocean beyond which all the faces that you do not remember cease to exist. Lean on me, O divine mother. Bless me with the mortality of a lowly parasite that leeches off the love of others and dies remembering the faces that love him. Thank you. Thank you. That will be all from me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just have a quick question for you, Atalant.
Yeah.
In your formative years, which part of Kolkata did you live in the bylanes? And after coming back in 2021, where are you residing in Kolkata?
I've grown up in Baligans, but I've been around a lot. But I've come back and I stay currently at Baligans. So.
Oh, back to Baligans.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right, wonderful. We now move on to Sabarna Chattopadhyay. She has been here also, patiently waiting for a long time. Just a brief introduction about her. Born in Chandannagar, Hooghly, and although obtaining her BSc Honours in Chemistry and a postgraduate in Computer Application, Sabarna had started writing poetry not just following a family tradition, but yearning to express scientific and logical way of thoughts into feeling and understanding her emotional and philosophical experiences more closely and richly. Her very first book of poems got published in the year 2018, and already in the year 2019, she was awarded the Shona Juri Sahitya Samman. So apart from her poems, not only her poems, but also her essays and prose and her writings for children get regularly published in renowned magazines. So, Sabarna ji, the microphone is all yours.
আচ্ছা, আমি ছোট ছোট 3টে কবিতা পাঠ করছি। প্রথম লেখাটি পড়লাম। যে হেঁটে যায় সে আমি নই, বাস থেকে নেমে গেল যে সে আমি নই, হেঁটে গেল অন্ধকার, বিশ্বাস উঠছে খোলাম কুচির মতো, পকেটে আকাল, সে শুধু পাগলের মতো কবিতা খোঁজে কবিতা, হাঁটতে হাঁটতে কবর খোঁড়ে রোজ। একদিন সেভাবে এক আশ্চর্য বাগানে মৃত্যুর মুখোমুখি দাঁড়াবে, হিম গলে ঢলে পড়বে পারিজাত। আমি ঘুমের ভেতর দেখব তখন অন্য এক তরুণ কবিতা শোনার সময় কিভাবে বারবার ঘড়ি দেখছে, শুধু বাড়ি ফেরার তাড়ায় অসহ্য লাগছে সব। আমার বরের দুশ্চিন্তা আমার অতীত, অথচ আমি জানি যে দুরকম আমি বেড়ে উঠেছি এতগুলো বছরে, তারা কখনো পরস্পরের মুখোমুখি হয়নি কোনোদিন। যে হেঁটে যায় অন্ধকারে সে আমি নই, আমাকে দেখতে হুবহু মায়ের মতো, সারা গায়ে মাতৃদুগ্ধের গন্ধ, মেয়ের ঘামের লালার ছাপ আঙুলের ফাঁকে ফাঁকে। সে রোজ ঘুম পাড়াতে পাড়াতে সিন্ড্রেলার গল্প পড়ে, জোনাকিরা ঘিরে ধরে, তারপর রাত্রি ঘুমিয়ে গেলে জেগে ওঠে এক জংলি বেড়াল। পরের লেখাটা পড়ি। ভাসান। এলো চুল মেঘ এলো, পিঠ জুড়ে নেমে এলো জল, আমাকে বিছিয়ে দিলে টুকরো টুকরো হলো নদী, ক্ষতদের সাড়া নেই, নেই বাকি শরীরের বল, মন যে অসার কেন বুঝতে পারত শোক যদি, শ্বাসে আর বিশ্বাসে পাটাতন কেঁপে কেঁপে ওঠে, ঘৃণাও যে ভালোবাসা ফুলদান কাল শীতে ভরা, উড়ে যায় লাল মাটি এলোমেলো ভাসানের স্রোতে, বরফ জমেছে মেঘে শরীরে এসেছে নেমে খরা, ভেসে যদি যেতে হয় পথ কই কত দূর যাওয়া, পথ নেই ভিজে বালি থই থই জল, চোরা বালি চোরা স্রোত মাঝে কার শুধুই না পাওয়া, নোনা জলে ডুবে আছে জ্যোৎস্নায় ঢাকা এক স্থল, ধূসর পায়রা দুটো ঝাপটায় শিশিরের দাগ, তোমার হাতের কাছে আমারও হাতের এক ছাপ, ফেনা এসে ধুয়ে দেয় মুছে যায় বালির আঁচড়, মৃত্যু কি পারবে কাল মুছে দিতে অলিখিত পাপ, জলের নিচেতে ভাসা আধ ভেজা দেবতার মুখ, কে পারে এমন ভাবে ছেড়ে দিতে আঁকড়ানো সুখ। শেষ কবিতাটি পাঠ করব, শুধু একা রবীন্দ্রনাথ। আমি এখন মিহি আলো জেলে শুয়ে শুয়ে রাতের কথা ভাবছি। ফোনে কথা বলে চলেছে ব্যস্ত স্বামী। রবীন্দ্রসঙ্গীত বাজছে ঘুমন্ত পাড়া থেকে। মৃদু হাওয়া উস্কানি দেয় ঢিলেঢালা পোশাক। জেগে থাকার ভেতর কি ভীষণ দগ্ধতা। পাতা উল্টে যায়, জুঁই ফুলের গন্ধ আসে। কতকাল যাওয়া হয় না কলকাতা। সন্ধ্যার বৃষ্টি ভেজা পথ, উড়ে যাওয়ার নেশায় তোমার রুমাল। কতকাল আজকাল স্বপ্নে বারবার মাকে দেখি। চলে যাওয়ার আগে এমন করেই সাজতো মা। কি হবে কবিতা লিখে ভাবতে ভাবতে ঘুম আসে। মাথার ভেতর ঘুরঘুর করে সুর। কাজের পাহাড়, সিগারেট ধরায় বর, নীল ধোঁয়া ঘিরে ধরে। তাকিয়ে দেখি শুধু একা রবীন্দ্রনাথ বেজেই চলেছেন গোটা জগৎ সংসারে। নমস্কার।
অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ। And
her poetry is very powerful in the sense that she is very clear in whatever she has said so far in her poetic lines, and they are so full of good metaphors also. যেমন আমার খুব সুন্দর লাগলো ওই ফ্রেজটা, যেমন যে হেঁটে গেল অন্ধকারে সে আমি নই, আমার মায়ের। আরো অনেক সুন্দর সুন্দর কতগুলো ফ্রেজ পেলাম, যেমন আজ ভেজা দেবতার মুখ, কিংবা উনি কখনো লিখছেন ঘৃণাও যে ভালোবাসা। এইসব আজকালকার যে কবিতার যেই নতুন দিগন্ত উন্মোচন করছেন এরা, খুব সহজ কতগুলো শব্দ, কিন্তু বুঝতে কোনো অসুবিধা হচ্ছে না, কিন্তু অদ্ভুত একটা সুরিলিজমের ছোঁয়া আছে এইসব কবিতায়। সম্পূর্ণটা এখন বলা যাবে না, কিন্তু ওনার যে কটা কবিতা শুনলাম, তিনটে কবিতাই আমাকে ঋদ্ধ করলো। এবং আমি মনে করছি নতুন কবিতা এই পথে যদি চলে, তাহলে আমরা বোধহয় আরো উপকৃত হব, নতুন কবিতা শুনতে পারবো। সুতরাং সাবর্ণকে ধন্যবাদ। সাবর্ণা, ওর নাম সাবর্ণা, তুমি আমাদের সঙ্গে আবার সৃজনে জয়েন করো। তোমাকে আরেকবার ধন্যবাদ জানাচ্ছি সৃজনের পক্ষ থেকে।
বোধায়ন, তোমাকেও ধন্যবাদ জানাচ্ছি ওটার একটা কুইক সামারি করে দেওয়ার জন্য। আমরা পরে রেকর্ডিং এ পুরোটাই শুনে নেব। আর at this stage I would also like to thank Said Jamal of our poetry team. I don't know whether he's on the call, for introducing Sabarna to the Srijan poetry platform. Last but not the least, we come to Baisali Chatterjee Dutt, a poet published in various anthologies and magazines, print as well as online. Baisali was a columnist and agony aunt for Mother and Baby, and contributed to Parent and Baby magazines. She has compiled and edited volumes for the Chicken Soup for the Indian Soul series, contributing to 10 other titles. Passionate about theatre, and her latest book is actually 3 is a Lonely Number. It's a novella in verse. Passionate about theatre, she has performed with top English theatre groups in Kolkata, Bangalore, Bombay, and other places. And she has adapted popular literature and turned them into written scripts, donning the hat of a director too. Currently, she's a drama teacher and creative consultant at Sri Academy in Kolkata, and also freelance content editor and writer. She was born in New York, schooled in Bangalore, has an MA in French from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, but now lives in Calcutta. Thank God for that. Either resisting siren calls of all things chocolate, or refereeing never-ending sparring matches between her teen boys. Baisali, voila.
Merci beaucoup, Rajuda, and very good evening and namaskar to everyone. Always a pleasure to read for Srijan, and I hope you enjoy my selected pieces for this evening. I'll be starting off with a short poem called Homeschooled. This was published last year in Borderless Journal. Homeschooled. I eat a new word every day for breakfast. You butter the newspaper and down it with a cup of sugarless tea, leaving behind crumbs on the chair. After you leave, I regurgitate my newly acquired set of letters, spit them out, and let them bounce off the walls. Some settle on my broom-wielding hand like henna, so I softly trace their beauty like a baby's sleeping face. I revel in their temporary freedom and pound the floor with my bare fists and elegies. When you're back, I swallow them whole, caging them as before, allowing you to believe that yes, right away, and thank you are the sum total of my vocabulary.
Wow. Wow. Srijan.
My second poem, this was inspired by a conversation that I had with my younger son when he was much younger. It's called A Mouthful of Daisies. I will buy you a house, Mama, he says to me, wrapping his arms around me, honeysuckle to pillar. Thank you, my heart. I laugh, wind chimes in the breeze, light and loved and misty-eyed. Will you live there with me? I continue, my happiness balloon hovering over treetops. No, Mama, he says, surprised, incredulous, busy bee caught in midair. I will live with my family, he continues, young mango of my womb. My face is a popped bubble. I have soap in my eyes and my smile is now an urn of sadness. But don't worry, I will visit you every day and eat with you. My little lamb, young mango of my womb.
Wow. Excellent.
Thank you. And my last poem is my attempt at a bhakti poem, except that instead of addressing it to Krishna, I've addressed this poem to Radha. And it's called This Restlessness. Tell me, Radha, where did you take your bits of broken after he left you? Did you wait for monsoon clouds to unburden your heart that still danced to the tunes of a distant flute that sang Malhar? Did you go to the forest alone and sit under the kadamba to watch butterflies mate while peacocks cried and the restless leaves rained down on you? Does the arrival of spring still leave you breathless? Where do we take our bruised yet still beating hearts while flipping rotis and crying tears into the milk as it boils because his kisses tasted of ghee, of curds, of kheer? Did you ever heal, Radharani? Teach me how. I do not wish to live as Meera, singing my love songs, my swan song to a stone deity. I want to be like you, breathing while the flame of the forest silently blooms in my veins. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. If Radha had listened to this poem a long time back, things might have taken a different course. Okay. Also, it reminds me briefly of another poem when Gautama Buddha left also his home. You know, there is a poem in Hindi, Yashodhara ki Uljan, Sakhi ve mujhse keh kar jate. No. So there are some kind of similar, that was from Yashodhara's point of view. And you're addressing Radha about this also. Very good. Excellent. With that, we come to the end of the evening's agenda of poets who are on the list.
So if I pass on this burden to you after thanking you beautifully for this lovely conducted meeting, because it is for the very first time that by 8 o'clock we are done. And Raju?
Yeah, if you would like to wind up, please do.
But it has been a wonderful evening, all of you, and all the poets and who have taken the trouble. Geet ji, itne व्यस्त जीवन में भी आपने हमारे इस महफिल में अभी तक आप हैं. That speaks volumes about what poetry can do, can pull people all these lovely people who are with us. I can't forget the interaction which the lovely family of Balamani Amma has had. What they have done and how much they have been instrumental in telling us how beautiful the culture of Malayalam writing is, and how rich and how philosophical and how full of meaning every word which they have written feel like. And there is absolutely no way to thank Thomas enough, and all the rest of you who have joined, even these guests like not saying a word, but like Shumit, like Nileen, our lovely poet, like Ishita, and like Gauri Shankar Raina, or even Raghavan, and finally, of course, Sujata Das, for taking care of the ins and outs, sitting somewhere, although she's not too well, but even then managing things. And I can't forget to thank Baisali, because she has been to Srijan, and every time she comes here and reads, she does make our hearts flutter. And the new entrant today, Shobita Satchi, I look forward to having you in Calcutta soon. And I can't forget her talking about Bhalobasha being her second home. And of course, Nobonita Debshen is very, very dear to Srijan especially. So Shobita, thank you very much for being with us. And our president and our vice president, we cannot ever forget for lending their support so beautifully to us. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.